Hello. Today's object, which is number 5 of my series on the history of Summerhill, is the newspaper. And I'm going to start off by just reading from a children's newspaper that was published in 1926. And it was the world's first newspaper written and edited and published for children. It was a weekly newspaper, a national paper, that was founded in 1926 in Poland by a wonderful man called Janusz Korczak. And Janusz Korczak was Polish. He was a Jew, secular Jew, and some people who knew about A.S.Neill before they knew about Korczak called Korczak the Polish A.S.Neill, because they have a lot of similarities in common. Korczak had created and lived in a democratic orphanage for Jewish children, and he believed that the children should run their own court system and justice system, and created a children's court within his orphanage. Anyway, this is the first national children's newspaper. It came out every week, called The Little Review, and this is a quote from that newspaper. "Will this world never change? Will the one who suffered yesterday as a deprived child, today, when fully grown, take his turn at the role of oppressor? Happiness will befall those future generations who will not forget their own childhood." And that was written by a Polish child, published in The Little Review. Anyway, newspapers. Let's have a look at A.S.Neill. Now, A.S.Neill, again, from this wonderful book, A Domine's Log, he tells us about reading the newspaper every day to discuss with the children. He reads the war news. And at one point, he early on in the book, he tells Lizzie Smith off for talking last Friday whilst I was reading the war news from the Scotsman newspaper. "I am sorry," he says, "that I punished her. It was weakness on my part, weakness and irritation. If she had no interest in the war, why should she pretend that she had? But no, I cannot have this. I must inculcate the idea of a community. The bairn or children must be told that others have rights. I often want to rise up and contradict the minister in the kirk or church, but I don't. The people have rights. They do not come out to listen to me. If I offend against the community will punish me with ostracism or bitterness. We have all a right to live our own lives, but in living them, we must live in harmony with the community. Lizzie must be told that all the others like the war news, and that in talking she is annoying them. Yes, I must remember to emphasise continually the idea of a corporate or community life." So there, Neill, as a young head teacher in his young 30s at Gretna Green School, discusses the role of community and how in his teaching he wants to promote community. So shall we have a look at what he says also about producing a newspaper for the school? He doesn't do it as head teacher of Gretna Green School, but he thinks about it. So this is towards the end of the year, towards the end of the book. "I've been considering the subject of school magazines, and I wonder whether it would be possible to run a school magazine here in Gretna Green. I've had no experience with a school magazine, but I edited a university weekly for a year." And he goes on to talk about that he does about some of the headlines and things. Can I say that according to Kroll in the biography of Neill, who quotes from A.S.Neill's university days editing the magazine called The Student for Edinburgh University, he says that Neill uses the magazine to criticise the class system within the university and the way that the students do not communicate with each other, that the upper classes don't talk to the lower classes, and that there is no sense of community because of class system within the university. He also uses the newspaper to criticise the relationship of the professors, because the professors are arrogant and do not believe that they should engage with the mere students in terms of discussions and after the lectures. And also he criticises the methods of teaching and the philosophy of teaching and the exam system. He thinks that the exam system leads to cramming, and that lectures are simply about writing notes and then being tested on those notes for the exams, which he abhors. He doesn't think the university creates thinking, creative people. Which is very similar to one of his heroes, H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells went to my college, well, I went to his Imperial College of Science, Technology and Medicine, and H.G. Wells, in his, I think second to last year, was student. He actually founded the student magazine at the Imperial College, and in the first issue that he publishes, he says that he expects the students of Imperial College to be creative and to be fantastic journalists and writers that will contribute to the magazine. But in this editorial, he goes on to say that if this doesn't happen, if he doesn't get wonderful creative pieces from the students, then it might be because the college is based on cramming, on learning by rote, on and competing for exams, rather than on helping to create thinkers and those students who should be creative. So Wells and Neill share similar views and had similar experiences at their universities. So he goes on in Dominic's log. If Willie Wilson knew that Friday's edition might contain a paragraph to the effect that he had been discovered murdering 2 young robins, I fancy that he would think twice before he cut their heads off. So he imagines how the newspaper would help in terms of making the students, and in fact later on he gives examples of the parents, accountable to the community, which is an interesting thing. And he would also put their names, the newspaper would have the names of the children. He said, someone has said that the most arresting piece of literature is your own name in print. The magazine would also contain interesting editorials for the parents. I mean, during his time at Gretna Green, he organises evening lectures for the parents on parenting and other issues. Art would be a prominent place in the magazine. If a bairn, a child, made a good sketch or a bonny design, it would be reproduced in the magazine. Of course, the idea cannot be carried out for lack of funds. Yet I fancy that the money now spent on hounds and pet dogs would easily run a magazine for every school in Scotland. The technical difficulties could easily be overcome. The bigger children could read the proofs and paste up the magazine. So they would actually produce the magazine, and the teachers would revise it before sending it to the printers. I must get estimates from the printers, and if they are moderate, I shall try to raise funds by giving a school concert. So it's interesting here that he's talking about the student newspaper being a way of getting the students to express themselves and be proud of their work and their names, and also be sort of accountable for their behaviours, and in a sense to develop a sense of community, which is exactly what Janusz Korczak says in terms of his writings about why have a student newspaper, because he created the first Polish national newspaper in the world, but he also created for his orphanage, he created stories. and a newsletter full of stories to do with the children and the news of the school. And he writes about why. Why would you have a newspaper? He says, the newspaper gives courage to the shy and the meek. It wipes the noses of the overcocky, regulates and shapes public opinion. The newspaper serves as a society's conscience. Have you a complaint? Then write to the newspaper. You are angry? Then write. You accuse me of falsification and incomprehension? Fine. So let's begin an open debate. Show your documents and know that you cannot deny it later. The newspaper brings the class or the whole school together. It encourages friendships between those who would not even have known each other otherwise. It gives the floor to those who can only express themselves in writing. And even in the hottest arguments will never get the right to speak. So Korczak there is arguing for, and he argues for newspapers for every school, that children should all have access to reading and writing and contributing to a newspaper that helps to create and express the community and helps to create friends, but also helps, as Neil was saying, for people to know what other people are doing. Now there is a wonderful community called Kingsley Hall. Now Kingsley Hall is in East London. It's near me, in fact, near Bow in East London, and it was set up by two sisters, Muriel and Doris Lester, and they set it up, and it's named after their brother Kingsley, and it's part of the settlement movement. It's about people who are fairly wealthy or middle class coming into the working class areas and setting up communities where they would have either volunteers who could stay in the community, and they would have buildings where the people living in the community, the working class people, could come together and learn from each other and also learn from the guests. So another example of the settlements is Toynbee Hall, but there's loads of examples, and they were also called the university settlements because they were first created by people from Oxford and Cambridge universities. Trying to get the university educated students to see what it's like to be poor and to work with the poor as equals. Now this settlement movement was one of the things that actually inspired Korczak to set up his orphanage, because he visited London and the poorest areas of London to see how children were looked after in terms of community and orphans, and he was inspired by a settlement where he saw the way the children and the adults lived and learnt together. Anyway, one of the sisters, the Lester sisters, was walking down the street and she bumped into one of the parents, and this parent had a son who was a soldier in the war and was in Germany and had written her a letter, and she showed this letter to one of the Lester sisters and said, "Look, my son's saying that the children, this is after the war, the children are starving, the German children are starving. Can we do something to help them?" Now this hadn't been in the press very much, and what this resulted in was the settlement and the community of East London, of Kingsley Hall, under the leadership of the two Lester sisters, created a parade. They created a march from East London to Parliament, and that parade was, they called it a walking newspaper, because they wanted to get across to the community, the other communities of London, and to those in the House of Commons, that children in Germany were dying through starvation and malnourishment, and that they were dying because of the settlement after the First World War, and they needed help. And that none of the newspapers were publishing this, so the Kingsley Hall created what they called a walking newspaper. They walked with the headlines saying, "German children starving, need help, donate bread, donate money to help the German children." Right. So then we have some stories to do with newspapers. And I just want to end by saying that it's a great thing at Summerhill that the children, especially sometimes in terms of the classes, class 2 is one of them, they'll create their own newspapers. And they write them, they draw them, they edit them, and then they sell them to raise money. And some of these newspapers are called Orange Peel, after the phrase Neil Orange Peel, which is what the children used to chant as Neil went around the school sometimes, making fun of his name. Okay, thank you very much indeed.